the porn industry has intentionally gone after creating porn that hooks women. And so,
Really?
people say, well, aren't men visual and women are not? Women can be visually aroused too. And they tend to want more of a storyline attached to that. But the pornography industry brings in more money than the NBA, the Major League Baseball, and NFL combined annually. So you're talking about a multi-billion dollar industry that is very motivated to get consumers hooked young, male and female. And so they've aggressively gone after the female market.
Hi, friend. You're listening to Find Hope Here. I'm your host, Teresa Whiting, author, speaker, ministry leader, friend, and fellow struggler. This is a podcast about the messy, complicated, painful parts of life, but also the beautiful, joy-filled hope that Jesus promises. Each week, we dig deep into God's Word together and talk about how His truth impacts our everyday lives. I'm not going to ask you to sit with me and have coffee because I seem to have my best conversations while I'm just doing life. So I'd love to hang out with you as you walk or fold laundry or drive to work. You're invited to join me in pursuing the hope God promises. No matter where you are or where you've been, I pray you always find hope here. Let's jump into today's episode. Well, welcome, friends. I am so excited to introduce you today to our guest. Dr. Juli Slattery is a clinical psychologist, author, speaker, and the president and co-founder of Authentic Intimacy. That's a ministry devoted to reclaiming God's design for sexuality. She's the author of 12 books and host of the weekly podcast, Java with Juli. She and her husband, Mike, are the parents of 3 sons, and they live in Akron, Ohio. So, Juli, welcome to Find Hope Here.
Oh, so good to be with you. Thanks, Teresa.
I can't tell you how excited I am for this opportunity. So as we begin, why don't you just tell the listeners a little bit more about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, boy, the last 12 years, God has called me into this space of biblical sexuality. And before that, as you mentioned, I'm a clinical psychologist. I was more kind of focused on just like marriage and family issues, women's issues, kind of more generically. And since 2012, like this is the space that I've inhabited, that God has called me to. And I honestly have just been on a learning journey with everybody else of searching the scriptures, integrating biblical truth into the real life questions and issues that we're grappling with and experiencing around sexuality. So everything from sex and marriage to singleness to pornography and addiction, sexual abuse recovery, questions around gender identity and sexual identity. So really discipling Christians
Mm.
on those topics. And also, I'd say within the last 4 or 5 years, spending a lot of time equipping pastors and church leaders to do that work within their own ministries.
Yes, yes. I have been actually following your work for many, many years, and I'm a huge fan, but also I just so appreciate how you step into this space, which can be really uncomfortable for a lot of people. There's not a lot of people out there talking about biblical sexuality. And I appreciate how you come at it with practical tools and biblical truth. Like it's such a beautiful integration. And I'm just curious, like, what made you step into this space?
It was nothing short of God. So at the time, I was working for Focus on the Family, and that was sort of my dream job,
Hmm.
just doing their daily broadcast and communicating and learning all that. And God just took me through a season of about a year of really seeking Him personally and just transform me in a way of knowing what intimacy with Him is.
Mm.
And during that season, He just burdened my heart for the topic of sexuality and sexual brokenness. It was like He was just saying, hey, there are all these women in particular who are crying out for help. Like, where are you in my loneliness? Where are you in my struggle? And being at Focus, which is a great ministry, I felt like all we were doing though was on these issues, sort of dropping care packages at 30,000 feet.
Mm,
And the church really didn't know how to be in the trenches with people who were suffering and asking hard questions. And so he made it really clear to me that that was what he was calling me to. He sort of moved heaven and earth to show me, as he's so gracious to do when he asks us to do hard things, to the point where like I just couldn't say no, and
mm.
left Focus and co-founded the ministry with Linda Dillow, who some of your listeners might know, but she is just a wonderful spiritual mom and encouraged me to take that step of faith. And then the ministry has just sort of evolved from there, as the questions continue to come and as the need really increases and the awareness increases within the Christian church.
Yes, yes, I love Linda as well. I think one of your first books might have been Intimate Issues, which I read years
Yeah,
ago.
so yeah, Linda wrote Intimate Issues before I knew her with Lorraine Pintus.
Okay, okay,
So she has been in this space before I was. And
okay.
she would say to me, like, I'm throwing the mantle on you. Like, you're
Mhm.
taking it for this generation. I'm like, I don't know if I want it, but
Right,
she and
right.
I did co-author Passion Pursuit and then Surprised by the Healer.
Okay. So you are in very good company on this podcast because we have been talking about sexual brokenness from the beginning. That's kind of what started this podcast in the first place. And so I know that my listeners are going to resonate with the things that you have to share. But in particular, we're talking about today, we're talking about women and porn. And
Mm-hmm.
that is a topic that is so seldom talked about. And you and Dr. Joy Skarka just co-authored a book together, and it's called Her Freedom Journey, a guide out of porn and shame to authentic intimacy. And I have a copy of it right here, and I just finished reading it last week, and it is so life-giving. I love it so much because it's both a personal journey. I mean, Joy shares kind of her story, but there's also this component of biblical integration, and it's a workbook, and it's just so many things wrapped in one. So, can you tell us maybe why you wrote the book? What's the premise behind it?
Yeah, so Joyce started writing the book by just feeling called, like, I need to share my story. She wrote the first kind of take at it or version, and it was pretty much all her story. And she asked me to look it over, and I was like, hey, I think we could write something together that
Mm,
not only is your story, but also like a tool of not just, I mean, I think there's so much to be gained by hearing another woman's story and learning from her. But then when you add to it, like the practical steps of not just how do you stop looking at pornography, but what are you walking towards? What does wholeness look like? How do you get there?
hmm
And so then she and I journeyed together on that, with her giving me what she had written. And I kind of went through and integrated a lot of the things that I've learned over the years in terms of biblical sexuality, sexual brokenness, and wholeness. And it's really neat to see how all the pieces came together.
hmm
Uh, because I do think, like, if I had written it alone, it would have been lacking so much of like that compassionate voice that's like, hey, I've been here. I know what this feels like. Because the journey of getting free from porn is not a one and done. And for the woman who's like, hey, I've confessed this, I've prayed to God to take it away, and I'm still struggling, that's the norm. Every
hmm
now and then you'll meet someone who has like this radical 1 minute transformation, but 99.5% of people are going to be on a journey. And so it's good to have somebody else with you who's been on that journey. And so Joy's story and voice throughout the book really encourages women on that.
Yes. Yes,
Mhm.
it's such a comprehensive guide, and she really comes alongside the reader as a
Mhm.
friend. Like
Yeah.
I'm right here with you, which I
Hmm.
love. I love that voice that she lends to the book. So, how big of an issue is women in porn? I mean, it's not something that I've ever heard talked about. The first time I even ever heard this talked about was when the two of you were talking about it on Java with Julie. So is it a fringe problem? Is it a big problem? Tell us about what maybe the statistics are.
Yeah, I would say probably 20 years ago, it was more of a fringe problem. A lot of women, if they were getting involved in pornography, many times it was because a boyfriend or a husband introduced them to it. And the percentages were more like 15 or 20% of women who had some sort of struggle with pornography. But we're seeing in the younger generations, like if you look at 40 and younger, but particularly Gen Z, that this is actually a normal issue,
Mm,
unfortunately. So I would say, like, when you're looking at adolescents and young adults, you're looking at over half of women who have a significant porn struggle. I think 50 Shades of Grey, when that first came out, that kind of raised the awareness of pornography can be written, it can be erotica. There are a lot of women who are getting pulled into it that way.
hmm
But now with a few things, first of all, smartphones and devices, like kids are getting exposed to porn, male or female, at the youngest of ages.
hmm
And second of all, the porn industry has intentionally gone after creating porn that hooks women. And so,
Really?
people say, well, aren't men visual and women are not? Women can be visually aroused too. And they tend to want more of a storyline attached to that. But the pornography industry brings in more money than the NBA, the Major League Baseball, and NFL combined annually.
Wow.
So you're talking about a multi-billion dollar industry that is very motivated to get consumers hooked young, male and female. And so they've aggressively gone after the female market. And the result of both of those things, as well as isolation that we see teenagers and young adults experiencing, it's just, like I feel like we have to assume now that you do have a struggle with porn until we find out you don't.
Mm,
And when I was first even starting in practice, it was the opposite. Like you'd
right.
assume most people weren't struggling until you found out that they were. But that's completely changed.
Wow. And here's the thing, people aren't talking about it. I mean,
Mm.
especially women and
Yeah.
especially Christian women, I think there's
Yep.
so much shame associated with struggling with porn. Can you talk a little bit about the shame that kind of keeps women silent and sucks them in?
Yeah. So, pornography is very often paired with masturbation, which is another highly shame-filled topic that both men and women will say they're struggling with shame if they have a porn struggle. And then you add on the layer of being a Christian and knowing at some level, like, I shouldn't be struggling with this. There must be something wrong with me. Like every time I look at it, God must be disappointed in me. He hates me. Like it creates an alienation from God where you feel like I can't go to him, I can't ask him for anything. And then you add the second layer, the third layer really is I'm a woman. And the
Hmm
narrative has been, I think, for generations that women aren't sexual. They're the gatekeepers who are kind of trying to keep the guys at bay, and men are visual and men have all this sex drive. And so if I'm a woman struggling with this, then there's really something wrong with me. And then you add to it, particularly with Gen Z, all the messaging that like sex positivity, porn is good, you should enjoy it. It'll teach you about your body, it'll teach you about your sexual identity. So, Teresa, like when you combine all that, it's just like, it's just massive.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, yeah, it's just, and then women feel like they have nowhere to go, like to confess it, to get help. So, yeah.
Is the message, I'm just curious, I don't know, but is the message in the church today, like, are we adopting the world's message of like, it's okay, it's normal to masturbate, like, this is fine, this is good, this is part of developing a healthy sexual identity? Is that a thing?
It depends when you say church. I feel like there's there's a lot of different approaches. One of them, I think, is still to kind of double down with more of a shame message
Mm.
of, this is wrong, this is bad, this is sin, you should stop this. So you hear that. And then you hear a message that I would say not just disagreeing with, maybe masturbation, pornography is okay, but the underlying, the, the tenets and thinking that underlying porn use is even more critical to discern.
Mm.
And that is that sex is all about you. Like sex is about your pleasure, it's about your identity, it's about figuring out who you are. Like sex is a need. Um, and if you're going to be a healthy adult, you should have freedom to explore and to kind of act out what you feel will be satisfying to you. And so there are a lot of churches who adopt that underlying message and then they say, but don't look at porn.
Mm.
So, and that's where it's really conflicting. So I think that's the bigger issue is that not just have we maybe adopted pornography, but we've adopted a worldview that sets us up for even sex within Christian marriage to be all about what I want when I want it, about again it being a need. And sexuality is a very important part of who we are, but having sex and getting what you want sexually is not a need. And
Mm.
so I think the work we have to do is to get a lot deeper into some of the cultural lies that have sort of infiltrated our thinking.
What are some of those lies? What are the lies that we believe? And how do we break free from those lies?
Yeah, there are so many. Um, like I said, I think one of them is that sex is a need, and to be a whole person, you have to have a sexual outlet, you have to have sexual release, you have to explore sexuality. And that's just really not true. We don't see that in scripture. We see that everyone is sexual, but not everyone is having sex or needs to. And so resetting that really comes out of a humanistic kind of postmodern worldview, not a
Mm.
biblical worldview. I think another lie would be that women aren't sexual. They are. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think once we give women permission to embrace the fact that, yes, you're by God's design a sexual person, and there's nothing wrong with acknowledging that, whether you're single or married, but we have to learn to steward it. So I think that's an important lie that we need to uncover and
Mm-hmm.
then disciple towards what is it to steward my sexuality. I think lies like individual women will believe this, like I'm forever damaged because I've looked at porn. I'll never be set free.
Mm.
I think also just viewing porn as a behavior struggle is a big one. So the problem is this behavior I can't stop instead of realizing like how complicated our struggles with sex and pornography can be.
Mm-hmm.
That it's often tied into identity, it can be tied into past wounds and how I deal with depression and loneliness. And so when somebody just tells you to stop the behavior without shepherding you through what is that behavior actually serving for you, and where does
Right.
God want to enter into your wounds and your struggles, like that's another thing that I think is important to change.
Yes. Yes, that is so good. And to not just look at the behavior, but to figure out, what is this stemming from and going back to those things and bringing healing to those places in our lives. Because you're right, our behaviors stem from our attitudes, our thoughts, our beliefs, our past
Yeah.
trauma, our past
Mhm.
experiences. And so all of that is going to contribute to that. So let's say a woman steps into the world of porn and then it's like it gets its hooks in her. It's like it doesn't let go. What are some of those things that keep you stuck? Why does this happen?
Yeah, I think there are a few things. Number one, we know a lot more about neurobiology than we ever had before. And the neurotransmitters that are released when you see something exciting sexually are powerful. And if you think about God's original design, He wanted that first exposure of a husband and wife, being naked together for the first time, enjoying sex for the first time. He wanted it to be like a Hallmark experience, like not the movie Hallmark, but like,
Right.
like the cornerstone of, wow, like I want to keep coming back to this. This is awesome. But when that first exposure is to pornography, you have these neural pathways that are powerful that begin to develop and draw you to want to go back to that again and again. And pornography is designed to feed you novel sexual experiences. So whatever you looked at 2 years ago is not likely to have the same neural response today. And so pornography will feed you something just a little bit more exciting or different, riskier, which gives you a high. It's very much like a drug, and that reinforces that neural pathway. So that's the first thing, is just what's happening in the neurobiology of our brains. But the second thing is that pornography really does work like a drug. So these great feelings that come from dopamine and serotonin that produce, a sense of euphoria, but also peace. It's short-lived, but when you feel depressed, when you feel rejected, when you feel lonely, like that's a quick fix. And now it's readily available with our access to porn being in every device we have.
Right.
And so you start to become dependent on that. In a similar way that you could become dependent on, when I feel sad, I eat Ben and Jerry's ice cream, or, like I misuse a good gift. And that's really the shift of thinking, like sex is a good gift, just like ice cream can be a good gift. But when we misuse them and we become dependent upon them is when we start an addictive cycle that can be really harmful. And then I think also the secrecy in pornography, the shame, it really keeps us from like bringing this to communities or people that can help us get set free.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that perpetuates itself. The shame keeps you silent, which keeps you trapped, which keeps you more
Right.
silent, which keeps you trapped. And you just end up in this cycle of being
Yeah.
stuck.
Right.
And so it's so hard to be the person to go first and say, I am struggling with this. And it's hard to find a safe place to even do that, because of the shame associated with it. One of the things you talk about in your book is, why trying harder doesn't work. And I love this quote from page 145. You say, hard work is usually motivated by fear. Surrender is motivated by love and gratitude. And I'd love for you to talk a little bit about why trying harder doesn't set you free.
Yeah. So, trying harder is sort of making these promises to yourself and God that I'm never going to look at porn again. If I do, I'm going to make myself like run laps or, like do something to punish myself. It's really more of a work-based approach to things. And in general, like that self-discipline doesn't work long term. The people who do find any success from that, they just move their addiction to something else. So maybe they're no longer looking at porn, but they're overeating or they're vaping or you name it. They've become addicted to performance. So the invitation that God gives us is not clean up your act, work harder, and then come to me. He's like, I know you're a mess, and I know that there's nothing you can do to save yourself. Bring it to me. Like when you look at pornography, I'm in the room. I knew that you were tempted by that before you even knew you were tempted by it. And so the approach of surrender that God invites us to is not fix yourself and try harder. It's admit how helpless you are and bring it to me and trust me. And trust that my truth can transform you, my love can transform you, that my forgiveness and redemption of your life is complete, and begin to walk by faith in those things. And when you talk to people who have really gotten set free from any form of addiction, including sexual addiction or pornography, it's when they've come to the end of themselves and they're like, okay, no more hiding, no more I'm just gonna tell a little bit and keep the rest a secret. It's like, I am so desperate for help that I'll do anything. And I'm gonna bring it all to God and trust Him and to show me what the next steps are.
Yes. I love how you talked about that invitation, that Jesus is continuously inviting people into relationship with Himself, not after they clean themselves up, not, once they get it all together, but He's always saying, come to me. And He's not saying, come to church, come to this list of rules. He's inviting us into relationship with Himself. And I think as we see Him and we know that He sees us for who we are and He's looking at us with compassion and steadfast love and faithfulness, that loosens some of those chains that compel us to continue in that kind of an addiction. So I love that the reminder that it's an invitation to come as we are. And then He doesn't leave us there. Like He then transforms us. It's so beautiful. I'm going to break in and interrupt this conversation right here, but we will continue it next week. If you struggle with your sexuality, here are 2 things I would encourage you to do right now, today, is order a copy of Her Freedom Journey and order a copy of Graced. Those 2 resources together will help lead you into a place of freedom. I'll have links to them and to everything else that we talked about today in the show notes. In closing, I want to leave you with this prayer from Romans 15:13. May the God of hope fill you with all joy and peace in believing, so that by the power of the Holy Spirit, you may abound in hope.